So, ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and get into this because it seems like the left has created a trap of its own making. We got to get into it. And now they are about to find out. They're on the verge of losing seats that, all things being considered, they should otherwise win. But because they are running these far left progressive candidates, because they handed the keys to the Democratic Party to the radical socialists, not so fast. Not so fast. Things are not looking good for them. In states that are not so cut and dry blue, the swing states, the ones that actually determine the presidency, is not really a good idea to have these far left progressive candidates win the primary, because you cannot say the same when it comes to the statewide elections. And that's why you now have Abdul El-Sayed, the likely Democratic candidate, attempting to distance himself from the socialist name tag, even though he wants to stand beside Bernie Sanders, take AOC's endorsement, campaign with Hassan Piker, and has defended the thinking behind defunding the police. And so he has been running on a brand that embraces a lot of what socialism stands for. But now, because he knows Michigan is not a Brooklyn City Council district and is not a safe progressive bubble where the Democratic nominee automatically wins, he's attempting to distance himself. The problem is nobody really believes him, which is why this is great news for Republicans. The whole idea of this blue wave come November, day by day, is becoming less likely to happen the way the left envisioned it. And so, as always, smash that thumbs up button. That's the best way to let me know you enjoy the content. For more, subscribe to the channel. Let's start right here.
Couldn't change the graphic. She drops out and she said, hey, I'm going to hold my support for whoever wins between these two. Well, the reason why that matters is she was kind of running in the middle. You've got Haley Stevens over here at 30, almost 30%. She's supported by Chuck Schumer. She's much more an establishment candidate. You look at Abdul El-Sayed, who we've talked about here. This is someone who's supported by Bernie Sanders, AOC, now Chris Van Hollen, which is kind of a big deal for that tenure of a senator to peel away from the leadership.
We start with your very own words, that you would like to abolish ICE. Now, what I would like to ask you is, ICE is simply the enforcement mechanism for democratically elected laws of the people. Now, for a party who has talked about the threat to democracy, is it your position that you do not want to see the will of the people, the democratically elected laws, enforced?
First of all, Will, you and I both know that immigration law is not criminal law. Immigration law is civil law. It's like getting a parking ticket.
You got attacked by your rivals for calling yourself a physician, not just a doctor, even though you don't have a valid state medical license in New York or Michigan, which apparently is what you need legally to call yourself a physician. Do you wish you'd just stuck to calling yourself a doctor, which you are, to avoid all of this controversy and attacks on your physician status?
At the end of the day, it's not about whether or not I'm a physician or a doctor. The question is, can you see a doctor? It's not about my education. It's about whether or not your kid gets a good education. So I'm just not spending
that's a good
time.
line, but people would say it's also about, did you tell the truth?
Well, I would say that I was the health director for the city of Detroit. I've done more to provide more people health care or eliminate their medical debt than most doctors have done in their practice career.
Oh, wow. So it's not about the label that you decided to put out there, but now that you're being called out for that label, it's not about that no more. It's not about if I'm a doctor or not. It's not about if I'm a physician, this or that. It's about the kids. Oh my goodness. Talk about trying to spin it. And so you have this guy, Abdul El-Sayed, who is looking like he will be the likely winner of the Democratic primary and will end up running against the Republican candidate, Mike Rogers. And so now he's attempting to distance himself from the socialist name tag, because Michigan is not New York. Michigan is not California. Michigan is not a deep blue state where it's automatically guaranteed that that's going to be a Democratic seat. Michigan is a swing state, a purple state, you could say. Trump carried it in 2024, which means that the voters out there aren't as progressive, as liberal as what you're going to find in, say, a New York, where that level of politics that Mamdani can get his far left progressive candidates House seat is not going to be able to play the same way in a state like Michigan. But let's go ahead and jump into the next clip where he's confronted with that question on, is he a democratic socialist? And listen to the word gymnastics that he attempts to use in order to distance himself from that label. But by the time you get to the end of his long-winded excuse, answer, you realize that it's not really as much of a denial as much as it is just the rearranging of words in order to fit a better image of what he wants Michigan voters to believe. Take a listen.
Let's talk a little bit about yourself, your own politics, your views, because you said you're not a Democratic socialist, but your policies really aren't in line with Democratic socialist ideology, like backing Medicare for all, for instance. And you're obviously campaigning with the most prominent Democratic socialist of them all, Bernie Sanders. So what makes you different than a Democratic socialist?
Manu, I support Medicare for all, not because of any ideology. I support Medicare for all because I went to medical school to learn how to heal. And when I graduated, I realized that I didn't want to work in a system that too often chews up patients and spits them out. I am a scientist. I try and take empirical questions and ask, how do you solve this problem? And right now, a lot of people are priced out of healthcare. And for the folks who aren't, they have a $4,500 deductible that they can't pay. That's putting us into bankruptcy at the tune of $225 billion in medical debt.
But if I can jump in, just what makes you different than a Democratic socialist?
I am not somebody who is a socialist. I believe in capitalism. I just believe that capitalism has to be regulated. If you read Adam Smith, who was one of the fathers of capitalism as we know it, he always knew that the biggest danger to capitalism wasn't government regulation, it was monopoly. And we live in a society right now where too many monopolies and oligopolies can buy politicians to get their way. It's the reason we're watching as our prices just keep going up and we keep getting further and further behind. So forgive me for actually wanting to regulate trillionaires and billionaires so that we can build schools and roads. I know you guys really desperately want to put me into a category. I'm just saying that take me on what I tell you that I'm trying to do. I've been very, very clear and consistent about the fact that I just think billionaires should pay their fair share so our kids get to go to good schools. It's not that radical.
Okay, so let's break down what just happened right there. He was asked whether he was a Democratic socialist or not, and he said no because he likes capitalism and it just needs to be regulated. But then he went on in a roundabout way to basically end up at the same endpoint, saying the same things that the socialists believe in. The billionaires need to pay their fair share, which is literally, the opening line of every Democratic socialist that speaks whenever you hear them speak, Mamdani, whoever. That's what they all say, but somehow he's different. He's not one of them. And so what I think he's trying to sell is the same thing that the Democratic socialists are trying to sell, which is they're all about the working class, they're for the people. But in a place like Michigan, it doesn't get the same level of just energy behind it when you talk about a national race. And so therefore he wants to use all the same language as the Democratic socialist without actually admitting and standing behind the fact that's what he actually is. And so let's go ahead and jump into this next clip, ladies and gentlemen, as he's confronted on his comments about defunding the police, which happens to be another socialist talking point. And so let's take a listen to how he tries to explain that one now. Take a listen.
I want to ask you about some scrutiny you've gotten for past social media posts that you deleted, including about defunding the police. Now, you've said recently you never called for defunding the police, but our K-File team here in CNN found interviews in the past where you did repeatedly back in 2020, including in the aftermath of George Floyd's killing. I want you to listen to your comments here.
I believe that we do need to defund the police insofar as defunding the police is disinvesting in the means of incarcerating someone or killing them on the streets. What if we were to invest in social services? What if we were to invest in public schools? What if we were to invest in public libraries? What would the world look like there? And I think that has to be the way we go. And that means both investing more in these services, and it also means investing less in police.
So why did you say you never call for defunding the police when it sounded like you did in the past?
You know, what's interesting about that comment is I go in as far as defining what I mean by that. Do you disagree with investing in libraries and public services and social services? You fixate on the word defund, but what I'm talking about is war material that we made too much of during the war in Iraq. And then because we had too much of it, we had to find somewhere to sell it. So we sold it to a whole bunch of local police departments. I believe in investing in retention and retirement for law enforcement. I've done work with law enforcement during my time in Wayne County.
But won't that issue of defunding the police, won't that become an electability issue in November?
Let me finish my answer, Manu. I actually don't think it is. I think the vast majority of people agree that they want to get home safely every night. I think the vast majority of law enforcement agree that they want to get home safely every night. I think the way that we have thought about law enforcement is we answer every social problem with somebody with a gun. And you talk to folks in law enforcement with whom I've worked very closely, they'll tell you they don't want to go on those runs where they know that somebody's in mental crisis. So maybe instead of investing in war material for PDs, we invest in a safe retirement for them. And then instead of sending a guy with a gun, we actually send a trained mental health professional.
And so what he wants you to believe is that you shouldn't put him in a box. That's what he said. He's not a democratic socialist. That's what he said. But he happens to have the same talking points that the socialists have. He believes the billionaires need to pay their fair share. Yeah, he doesn't want to defund the police, but he wants to send social workers out, which is literally the same thing that Mom Donnie was campaigning on when he was running for election, which is what you hear all these democratic socialists talk about when it comes to defunding the police and their solution for it all. And so this guy's trying to pull some sort of abracadabra magic act where he's like, well, I'm not a socialist, really. I just happen to stand next to all the socialists, have all the same socialist talking points and policy as far as what my agenda is. But no. Don't call me a socialist.
That's what I'm talking about. That's what I defined. And I think that's exactly what people want. Now, if you want to keep talking about one particular word that was in vogue that I tried to define at the time, sure. But I think if we're having a serious conversation about public safety, you'll see that my perspective is in keeping with exactly what most people who are rational about this question are talking about and what they want. I want law enforcement to be able to get home safely, and I want people to be safe in their communities. And the way we do that is to make sure that we have competent law enforcement and to make sure that we are not making war on our streets and that we have the social services that people need to stay healthy and safe.
And so here's my read on this situation. Right now, it's a close race. He's neck and neck with Mike Rogers, the Republican candidate who was endorsed by President Trump. As I said earlier, 2024, President Trump did carry Michigan. And so now, Michigan is not a deep blue state. It's a swing state. Therefore, he understands and realizes as much as he has been able to get this far with his far left ideology, pushing his far left agenda towards his base, that has been able to propel him in a position where now he will more than likely end up being the Democratic nominee. That doesn't play so well when we talk about a statewide election. Therefore, now you have to start to spin things in such a way in order to make yourself look more moderate, look more center than what you actually are. And I think that's what we're seeing from Abdul El-Sayed right now. An attempt to rebrand away from the socialist tag, despite the fact that everything up until this point, and even the things he's still currently saying, says that is literally what his agenda is built on, at least in my opinion. But ladies and gentlemen, that's not all, because you also right now you have DSA reps who have been going to the media explaining where they stand. They've been loud and proud saying, hey, we're the Democratic Socialists of America. This is our platform. This is what we believe in. This is what we stand on. And the problem is that, well, right now, when you have candidates like Abdul El-Sayed trying to distance himself from that whole tag, and then you have the reps going on television, when you kind of line up what he's saying versus what they're saying, it just happens to match quite a lot. Take a listen.
Do you really believe in open borders and not having deportations? That's just incredibly contrary to law enforcement and security.
America has a really long history of welcoming working class immigrants. My grandmother and her mother came through Ellis Island and worked from Germany and worked as seamstresses. I mean, we believe that
criminal illegal aliens in the country, don't they need to be removed?
We believe that demilitarizing the border, that violent oppression of working class immigrants who come here, is not something that most Americans want. And I think the backlash to President Trump's policies really show that.
And so I'm going to go ahead and leave it right here. I think this guy thinks voters are stupid. Now he's trying to distance himself away from the socialist tag after getting endorsed by the socialists, after locking arms with Bernie Sanders, after all the things that he did that align with the socialist agenda, and still actually leaning into those socialist talking points, just trying to word it in a different way to soften the language and make it more, basically sanitize it. That way it fits better for the state of Michigan. Because he understands it's not deep blue like a California, and so you have to attack differently. And while that may have worked for the primary to get him where he's at right now and allow him to win the Democratic primary nominee, gonna need a whole different attack when it comes to winning the statewide race, especially one where Mike Rogers is the candidate endorsed by President Trump, barely lost the last time, and it's a swing state that can go either way. And when the choice is between the far left Socialist and the Republican, the Democrat Party understands that in a state like Michigan, that's not going to fly the same way. But those are my thoughts in the update. Now I want to hear from you. Drop your comments down below. I appreciate when you guys chime in. Don't forget, you enjoy the content, smash that thumbs up button. That's the best way to let me know. For more, subscribe to the channel. And as always, until next time.